right. Welcome, everyone, to this webinar today, Simplifying Your Key Controls, Financial Controls That Scale with Your Business. And it is co-hosted today by Impero and PwC Denmark. Before we get started, I did just want to go through a couple of housekeeping items with you all. And the first is, of course, that this webinar is being recorded. We will also share it afterwards via email. So if for whatever reason you need to drop off early, don't worry, we will share the recording afterwards, both via email on our YouTube channel, but we'll also share it in the Impero Help Center if you'd like to see it there. Feel free to use the Q&A button and we'll address all your questions live, but we will wait until the very end so we can kind of get through the presentation. But if you have any questions throughout, I encourage you just ask them directly, and there should be a Q&A panel in the Zoom webinar for you to use. And if you have any questions throughout, feel free to chat in through the webinar chat and I'll do my best to help you. And a quick introduction to the speakers today, and Mikkel, I'll let you go first.
Thank you, Jasmine. My name is Mikkel and I'm a senior manager at PwC Denmark. I have more than 10 years of experience within the governance, risk, and compliance area, and with a background as a financial auditor. In addition to my career as a GSE consultant, I have worked in the industry as well at the world's largest shipping company. So I both know the theoretical side of the practical, let's say, and the practical reality of implementing internal controls in practice, basically. So later in this webinar, I will share some of the key challenges that we often see when we are in the market, and also together with Impero, try and showcase how many of these challenges can be addressed in practice through the right advisory support and with the right platform to basically help you get going.
Amazing. We're super happy to have you here today, Mikkel. And next, William.
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is William Christensen. I'm on the implementation team at Impero. So for those of you who are existing customers, we may have already worked together before. My day-to-day role is helping onboard new users to Impero, so taking existing requirements and translating them over to a best fit and best practices within the system. And today I'll be walking through some of the aspects and features of the platform to kind of complement what Mikkel will be going through today as well.
Amazing. And I'm Jasmine Hansen de Guzman. I'm the marketing director here at Impero, and I'll simply just be moderating and helping to guide you guys through today's session. And we've gone through all of the welcome and practical info, and then we're going to have Mikkel talk a little bit about how to move from a fragmented process to a scalable control setup. Also have William dig into that a little bit from a practical point of view in the Impero platform, how to reduce complexity with stronger foundation, and also have a look at how our platform can help improve your structure, transparency, and efficiency. And as I mentioned, we'll do the live Q&A at the end. A quick intro for any of you guys who are not familiar with Impero. We are a software as a service platform. We serve more than 200 plus different customers globally, and we are hosted in Europe. And our platform is really, really strong from a risk and internal control platform, and we work with finance, tax, and compliance teams, but so much more. But I'll save you any more information because you're going to get to see that in a little bit when William jumps into it, into the actual platform. But before we do jump into it, we do just want to launch a quick little poll. So this is going to pop up on your screen in just a second. And we'd love to hear a little bit about what is your current biggest challenge with your internal control environment. And it should be launched on your screen now. And is it that you have controls documented but limited risk visibility? We have heard of a lot of different organizations. Mikkel, William, and I were talking about this before, that they have a great control setup or documentation, but haven't actually done the work when it comes to risks. Is it lack of resources and time? Lack of internal buy-in or ownership. There is a lot of people who are very interested in improving their internal control environment, but just don't have that management support. Is it that your controls exist, but accountability and traceability is unclear, which can also be very stressful when audit season comes? Or is it that you still heavily rely on Excel and SharePoint? And if you have any others challenges than these, you're also welcome to throw them into the chat. I can see that about 27 of you have answered so far. the numbers keep ticking up. So far, it does seem like the top two challenges are still relying heavily on Excel and SharePoint. Hopefully, we'll be able to provide some inspiration on this today, but also that a lot of people so far have controls documented, but limited risk visibility. Mikkel, how does that play in with what you normally see when you're out speaking to people in the industry?
That basically fully echo what we're seeing in the market, and it actually fully reflects the next slides to come. So we're going to jump straight into all of those.
Amazing. All right, I'm gonna close this poll out real quick and just share the results with everyone. So you can see 29% of you have controls documented but limited risk. 12% lack resources or time, and another 12% lack internal buy-in or ownership. 18% you have your controls exist, but accountability and traceability is unclear. And 26% of you still rely heavily on Excel and SharePoint. So thank you so much for sharing where you're at. Like Mikkel said, this is exactly the right place to be if you're dealing with some of these challenges, and that's what we're going to address today. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Mikkel.
Thank you, Jasmine. And just a quick introduction to PwC. You're all familiar with the PwC brand, so let me just briefly introduce the PwC role in this webinar. Today, I'm representing the GRC team at PwC Denmark, where we work within, as said, the governance, risk, and compliance area, as well as the internal audit areas. In our team, we help organizations strengthen their governance framework and improve the way that they work with risk controls in practice. Our work typically includes everything within process optimization, process mapping, identification and prioritization of risk, design of controls, identification of controls, and then the embedding on the risk and the controls into the day-to-day operations. So it's not only going to be a compliance exercise, but we actually get some value out of it at the end. So in other words, we basically support companies both in designing the framework and also making it work into practice. The reason why PwC is participating today is that we see a strong value in combining the professional risk control expertise with the right system support to ensure that we can make it live within the organization. So again, going away from only being a compliance exercise, but we actually get it to work in practice and get the value out of it. From our perspective, the combination is often what helps organizations to move away from, let's say, the manual and fragmented setup to a more structured and scalable way of working. And that is what we're going to highlight today. And we're going to give, let's say, all the stories that we know. We're going to give tips and tricks, basically to help you guys listening in today to improve your own internal control environment. Well, let's talk about some purpose and benefits of listening in today. The purpose of today's webinar is to highlight some of the more common challenges many of your companies are facing today when establishing the, let's say, optimization and internal controls, as well as how you can simplify your key controls. What we want to do today is not only talk about the theory, but then also share some practical observations from the market. And we're also going to showcase it straight in the Impero platform so you actually can see it work. Today, I will focus on some of the more general trends that we often see, as mentioned before on the poll, and also make a deep dive into the risk picture, the control picture, and performing to ensure that there are some clear boundaries in what we actually see. Many of these things that we're going to showcase today, you can recognize from your own organization. Hopefully, we can also help you how to, let's say, get all the problems solved and also help you further in the challenges. We just want to address it and how it should work in practice. We have also included 3 examples on cases that we have worked with in the real life on how we have helped these clients basically solve similar challenges. So overall, today is all about making the topic practical, relatable, and hopefully useful for your own organizations today. Good. If we look at some of the general observations that we see in the market, this basically reflects what you just saw before in the poll section. So if you take a step back and look at the market more broadly, we see several recurring themes. These are not isolated issues in one company or in one industry. They are general tendencies that we often experience across many organizations. One of the recurrent challenges is the difficulty in creating the clear ownership of risk and controls. So basically, what to do, when to do it, who should do it, what is the right level of quality, what needs to be included as supporting documentation, etc. One of the other elements that we often see that organizations are struggling with, that is to see the value and the purpose of the internal controls. So is it actually linked to the strategy or the goal or the company's culture internally? So can we see the benefit of it when we do it, both on the top level, on management level, but then also on, let's say, the executor level, so who are performing the bank reconciliations, etc. We often see lack of resources and also competing priorities, and in some cases, lack of expertise and know-how on how to do this in practice. And of course, as we also see here, many companies still rely heavily on Excel and manual processes, which often can be limited in terms of we don't have the capacity to do it. And that's where it can be very time consuming, this exercise. And this, I could only imagine, sounds a bit familiar to many of you today. Even when the intentions are right, the operating model can often be too manual or too dependent on individuals and maybe also too difficult to scale. And that is why we also need to talk systems to make it a bit more easier and also to make it livable and make it work on a day-to-day basis. These are some of the patterns that we want to unpack today, both in general terms, but then also when we have these 3 good examples on how we have helped clients together in the market. Now I want to narrow down into risk control and reporting issues that we see, and also how to face these issues. But let's start with the risk perspective. One of the key challenges we often see is lack of overview of the risk landscape and also the organization's exposure. So in practice, that means that it can be difficult to know exactly whether the company is focusing on the right risks. Have we actually mitigating the right risks, or I would just have a full risk picture where it's actually not the one having the biggest impact on the organization. We also often see a very ineffective process for handling the risks and also ensure that they are mapped to the different processes, etc. Another challenge is that the linking is also, let's say, there's a missing link between the risk that we have and also the mitigating actions. And this is why we often see that the controls that are implemented don't really create that value that needs to be there. Because if you have controls today that doesn't really mitigate a risk, then it doesn't really make any sense and it doesn't really create any value for you. So that's where it's very important to start with, have eye on the risk and ensure that the control is actually mitigating a risk. Otherwise, you need to look into the risk mapping and the risk landscape that you have. What we see is also that risk may be assessed once, but are not updated enough. And here the basic rule is that you need to look into the risk at least once a year, or if any significant change had happened, because we know that the world is dynamic and the risk landscape are therefore also dynamic. So you need to look into the risks that are relevant for you last year. Is that still relevant for you this year? And how can we ensure that this is a dynamic exercise and not just a one-timer, that everything is good, but we don't look into it further. So you need to ensure this is a recurring exercise. This could maybe also be something that seems or hear familiar to what you experience in your own organizations, as said before. And at the end, and the bottom line is that we see frequently lack of clear ownership in the organization. Who is responsible for the risk assessments? Who is relevant, and who needs to be involved in risk assessment activities? So altogether, this makes the risk management less actionable and also less connected to the daily decision making. So this is very important, and this is where to start. If we then go to the control side of it, now we move away from risk, we look at the controls, and here we can try to see the challenges become a bit more operational. So very often we see that there's a common lack of responsibility and understanding in the organization. So why are these controls important? What is the value? So in simple terms, people are not always fully clear on who owns the control, what's expected, and how the control should be executed. And there's also all the practical, so the timing of it. Are we in due time to ensure that's also being validated or reviewed afterwards? We often see that it's very time consuming to maintain the control activities if it's based out of a manual activity like Excel as a platform. And that's just because it's too manual, it's too heavy to lift. At the same time, also just the onboarding of new employees to control activities or new processes and new businesses that need to be implemented in the existing control framework can also be very heavy to lift if you don't have system support helping you along the way. What we also see, that is terms of documentation. So a challenge is that, yes, you have documentation, but it may be scattered around on shared drives and hard copy and local on the desktop. So ensure that you have everything stored at one place. So you have the traceability and the audit trail of the documentation so you can find it when you need it. This talk also into the standardization aspect of it, because many often we see that many companies are doing the same kinds of controls, but they're doing it very differently. So it's difficult to have a clear picture of, is it actually done as it should be throughout the organization? And that is also where a system can help. And this is also where, if you don't have a system, that's where it starts to begin to feel a bit heavy than it should be, at least. So the challenge is not always just to define the controls, but making sure that they are executed consistently, effectively, and the way that it is possible to follow up and ensure that it is effective over time. Good. The last element, that is the reporting element. And the reporting elements, that is also where many of these challenges become most visible. It can be difficult to get a clear overview of the overall risk and control performance if it lives out of Excel and we don't have a strong reporting engine saying, here we can see that we have completed this entity, we're also on top of this entity, but we can see in the last entity, we are falling behind on the risk activities and the control activities. If you don't have a system, it is difficult to track the progress in activities in a reliable and a timely way. You can get the overview, yes, but again, it is time consuming. This is also where we need to ask the verification question. One thing is that employees say that have performed the activity and it is completed, but how do we actually verify that it has been completed in the right way, at the right time, and with the right quality? This is where, again, we are pushing the agenda with system, and also this is basically where we can help a lot, and you can be helped with the system support. Perhaps this is also something that you recognize that you lose a lot of time on reporting, you're using a lot of time to getting that clarity. And again, the system could just help you with getting all the basics right from the get-go. So this is just, let's say, when we look into the risk picture, we look into the control picture and the reporting picture, what we see in the market, we're going to have deep dives into actual client cases, as said before, an example of how to mitigate the majority of these aspects. But I would imagine that many of you can at least see these risks and also maybe have been exposed for them in your own organizations today. So this is just a highlight on what we see. And again, you're not alone. So many are facing these problems.
And I think that is such an important point, Mikkel. I think a lot of people feel, oh, am I the only one? And is it only in my organization that we're facing these challenges? But it is things we hear again and again. I think one of the other things that we want to ask before we jump into those different cases as well, because a good test of how strong and robust your control setup is if you acquired a new company tomorrow, how quickly could you onboard them into your control framework? So we've launched that poll now. Is it within a few weeks? That's, of course, the ideal scenario, making sure that you have that overall reporting picture that Mikkel was highlighting. Within 1 to 3 months, more than 3 months, or is it just not something that you'd be able to support today? For some organizations, it is something that would take a little bit of time, be a little bit manual. But of course, ideally, you want to try to get their information centralized as quickly as possible. I'm going to give it just another 2 seconds or so. But Mikkel, I'm guessing you've seen this happen plenty of times, and I know, William, you have as well, from an implementation point of view, where a new entity or several new subsidiaries need to be added into the control framework.
Yeah, and I think that's something we'll cover a bit later on when we go into the actual demo, just the ease of actually implementing and rolling out to new entities and scaling up the system.
Amazing. I'm just going to quickly share the results with everyone before we jump into those cases. So most of you, 38%, think you could do it within 1 to 3 months. That's amazing. But there is also a widespread of 16% who thought they could do it within a couple of weeks. Great job. That means you have a very robust control system. But there's also a widespread that are more than 3 months who would need it to be manual or ad hoc. So 19% more than 3 months, 13% manual and ad hoc, and 16% of you don't have a scalable framework for that today. But I will hand it over once again to Mikkel and William, because that's exactly what we want to showcase today, is how you can tackle that a little bit more effectively. So first case, over to you, Mikkel.
Thank you, Jasmine. And so far, we have talked about, say, the general trends and challenges that we see in the market. And hopefully some of these points also resonate with your experience in your own organization. To make it a bit more concrete, we brought these 3 examples on how we have helped the clients address similar issues in practice. So talking about the first case, that is a case where we have an organization that was growing and they needed a more scalable internal control setup across the group. The challenge was that it was not only that they needed to have the controls in place, but they also needed to create more transparency, stronger standardization, and have more consistent way of working across the entities. More specifically, the organization had limited visibility into the control execution across the group. So they simply didn't have the insight of, are we doing what we should on a timely manner? They also found it very time consuming to onboard new acquired entities into the existing risk and control activities and the existing processes. And in addition to that, different entities were again performing the same control in different ways. And that just simply doesn't make any sense. Standardize whenever it's possible. We know that there will be some small changes in what is maybe performed in Denmark compared to Sweden, compared to Norway, but the essence should be the same. So standardize whenever possible. This again, maybe also sounds familiar to some of you, and maybe especially the ones of you that work in a group structure with a business that are growing through acquisitions, etc. What the client needed was therefore a setup that was easier to scale and easier to roll out across the organization, both in the existing entities, but then also if additional entities will be onboarded and will be implemented in the solution. So talking the solution, with the PwC expertise and the Impero platform, the organization established a more scalable and standardized framework with a greater transparency and faster onboarding. And that is what William is going to showcase you in the Impero platform.
Thank you, Mikkel. And really a lot of the points you've made there around centralization and scalability are something we see very often when we have customers and new organizations coming over to Impero for the first time. They might have the motivation to centralize their control framework, but they might lack the infrastructure to do so. And I think that's where we can really help out. This is Impero. It is a browser-based platform, so you can access it from wherever you are. And whenever I show the system off, I usually begin by saying that for your end users, the ones who are actually performing the controls and doing their tasks, they won't be spending too much time in this dashboard. Our main driving sort of design philosophy is about making the system as simple and user-friendly as possible, because at the end of the day, we're trying to reduce the amount of work you're doing, not add to it. When you first log in for the first time, you have this quick overview of your overall control status. So how are things going, completion rates, the on-time rates, and so on. And in terms of the overall structure, Impero is organized into a few main modules. We have our control management module, reporting, and risk. So these all sort of tie together, although the focus today will be mostly on controls and reporting. In terms of how we structure controls in Impero, we use a system around control programs, which you can think of as kind of folders that will contain all of the controls that are going out. In this example, I have a few programs around different financial processes, but really you can set this up in a way that makes sense for your organization. Most aspects of the system are self-defined. So here I have my financial processes, but these could be different entities, departments, regulatory frameworks. However you're working today, the system itself is very adaptable and flexible in order to meet those needs. We're not putting you into a box for a specific framework or anything like that. The important consideration here is that access control is based around these control programs. So if, for example, I have my HR controls that might include payroll or something like that, it's not something you'd want to really have visible across the entire group. So you could isolate those controls into their own program and not have the risk of data exposure or overlap there. If I go into an actual control program, another useful case for the access control at the program level is if you have an external auditor who's coming in. Within the program itself, I can manage the access rights here. And if Mikkel, for example, is my external auditor, I can give him view access to this entire control program, meaning he can come in, collect the evidence he needs, and you don't have the risk of them changing controls or editing anything unless they have that specific access level. So it allows you to maintain that single source of truth when it comes to your control framework and gather evidence much more efficiently when it comes to do these audits or something like that. Within the control program, we have the list of controls going out to our end users. And if I take this one here, now we're actually in the design phase of a control in Impero. And again, we're trying to make this as straightforward and user-friendly as possible. So it's a no-code interface for the actual control tasks. You're just dragging and dropping different options in here. So whether you need to have some checklists filled out or collect file uploads for evidence, you can build the controls in whatever way makes sense for your overall control objectives. We have automation in terms of reminders. So if the control is not performed so many days before or after the due date, we can send automated notifications to help streamline the workflow and move things along as needed. Scheduling sections, so we can send out controls on a one-off basis or on a recurring timeline, so monthly, quarterly, again, whatever your current framework is set up like. And you can set the planning days for each user involved in the control. So how many days does each person have to actually do their part of the control? All of this feeds into more or less a template on the control. So this itself, you set the control up one time, and this assignment table down here is actually determining how many instances or copies of the control are going to be sent out ultimately. And this is where we come back to the centralization and standardization part of it. With Impero controls, we have a tagging system, again, all self-defined, where you can create different tag categories. In this case, I have different areas. So this is a finance control, whether or not it's in scope for an audit, different metrics and information I want to attach to the control. You can use the tagging system for that. But most importantly, in this example, is the entity tag category I've created here. So you can see on my assignment table, I have 3 different assignments, and each one of them is attached to a specific entity, which we can then use to build reports later on that I'll show in the next case. When it comes to onboarding a new entity, we talked about the ease of use and how quickly we can do that. When it comes to Impero, as long as you have the background information about who's responsible for doing what and whether or not the control is applicable to a specific entity, you can onboard them to a control by clicking on the new assignment table here. If I want to add myself, I can do that. And we can work either in single users, so we can involve up to 3 users as a responsible and then 2 reviewers who are actually performing the control. Or we can assign a control to an entire team. So this is a finance control. If I want to give it to my entire finance team for any one of them to perform, I can assign a user group to the control as well. This assignment tag section is where we'll attach it back to our entity. So I'll scroll down to my entity category here. If this entity is my new one that I'm looking to onboard, I just select that, add the assignment. And once I save the control, this new entity assignment will be included in the regular scheduling for the control. So in the next instance, when this control is sent out, if it's a recurring monthly or quarterly control, that new entity will automatically receive their own copy of this control, and you'll start collecting data to build reports around. And again, like I mentioned, these controls are more or less a template. So everything you set up on here, whether it's the description, the task, the scheduling, will be the exact same for all of your entities who are included on the controls. So you don't have this risk where a local entity might be making their own adjustments to the control or doing things a little bit differently. This allows you to achieve a 100% standardization and dedicated workflow for how you want to do things across your entire organization. And back to you, Mikkel.
Amazing. And now let's jump into the second case. So I'll let you jump into that, Mikkel.
Thank you, William and Jasmine. So case 2, here in this example we have brought today, the client and the organization needed a simpler and more structured way to drive the internal controls execution across the business, so the actual handling of the controls and performing them. One of the main needs was to establish a clear ownership and accountability for the control activities. So again, hiring the understanding of why we're doing this. The organization also wanted to have a less manual and less time-consuming way of working in terms of risk assessment and controls. Another important point of them was to create a better understanding of roles and responsibilities and the required actions. So again, highlighting that we want to take the control ownership to a higher level, and that's based out of information and way of working and how to do it in practice throughout the system. And finally, there was a need for system support to assign, manage, and follow up on controls to ensure that we are on top of all the controls that we are performing. Again, with the PwC experience and expertise and Impero's platform, the organization established a more structured setup with a clearer ownership, automated workflows, and then a stronger execution and also stronger execution rate. For me, the key takeaway was from this example that the control frameworks become much more effective when ownership is clear and the execution is supported by a structured process. And for some of you, this is also maybe very close to the type of challenges you are trying to solve today. So how are we getting these controls to live in the organization? How can we ensure that it is completed on time? And again, how can we ensure that the information is as clear as possible for the performers so they do it the right way with the right quality and as intended and also as described in the SOPs or processes wherever you have described this given control objective and performance. So how are we getting that clarity? That is William going to showcase new in Impero.
William, we just got to get you unmuted and then I'm sure we can showcase it. Awesome.
There we go. All right, sorry about that. I mentioned earlier that for most of the end users, the ones performing controls in Impero, they won't actually spend a lot of time within the dashboard itself. And that's because the primary notification will come in through an email whenever it's time for them to perform a control. They'll receive a message like this whenever the send date.
William, do you just want to share your screen or can everyone see it? Oh yeah, there it is. All right. Okay.
All right. So you'll receive an email notification like this when it's time to perform one of your controls with a list of all the controls you have to perform, as well as any pending actions or reviews you still have to do as well. All of the information about the control you're performing is included on this notification. So the name of the control, all of the tags we attach to it, including the entity tag, so you know who you're performing the control for. I think most importantly, the due date, so when you actually have to have this work done, and then the time period that this control is performing. This is all part of the automated process of controls in Impero. So once you set the scheduling for whatever recurrence your control is going out on, you don't have to adjust it in every instance or time period. This will continue to run until you turn the control off. To actually perform the control, you can click on this link here, which will bring you to the page where you're actually going to be doing your work. So again, it's very just, you receive the email, click on the link, you're already performing your control, trying to make the process very simple and straightforward. And here you'll see the initial setup we did during the control design phase. So whatever we put for the description and objectives on the control, will show for everyone who's performing this particular control, regardless of what entity they're performing it for. We could have bulleted lists here. We can link to external business procedures and even upload documents on the control tasks themselves if we need to refer to anything external, whether that's, as Mikkel mentioned, a standard operating procedure or some kind of reference document on SharePoint. We can include that as background information on the controls, so the end users will have everything they need when they're actually coming in to perform them. Additionally, we have some background information, everything you need to know about the control, the time period it's covering, where it's at in the workflow, including all of the users who are going to be involved, so you know who's responsible for what step in the process, including all of the due dates for each step as well. So I see when I receive the control and when it will be ultimately due for the final review. Finally, all of the tags, again, that we attach just for that reference point, all of the data you might want attached to the control, we can include within these tag categories here. After we reviewed the control description, objectives, what steps we actually have to perform, we can start going through the control tasks as a first responsible user. And I showed a little bit when we were designing the control, you can really set up this section in whatever way you want. We have a variety of different question types, so whether you want to run through a basic checklist or build a more advanced questionnaire through some conditional logic, we can support all of that within the controls you're sending out to your end users. In this case, we have a pretty straightforward example, just confirming whether or not the control was performed, and it was great. If not, we might want to ask for some additional explanations, documentation, either as a comment field, a file upload tasks. And on these file uploads, we can upload as many files as you might need, so there's no kind of hard limit to how much evidence you might want to collect on a control. Just some other examples we can include, some self-assessment questions around the control effectiveness, additional comment fields. And once you've performed the control as the responsible, you can save it and come back later or submit it, but you can also get an overview of what the reviewers are going to be looking for. And this final section down here is the activity log on the control. And this is where we come back to the idea about traceability within the system. Everything you do on a control, when you submit it as a responsible, when a reviewer approves the control, or if the reviewer rejects the control and sends it back in the workflow, all of those steps will be recorded on the control's activity log. So you have the full working history of what's actually being done and what steps we're taking when and by whom on the control. Once you actually do complete the control, we kind of go over to our reporting module now, and this is where we're going to be taking a deeper look at the data we're collecting on the controls. By default, we'll just show a pretty standard status report. So how many controls within this particular time period were completed on time, how many were a bit late, or how many are still pending or overdue. But we have a lot of flexibility within Impero's control module to filter down based on pretty much any information that's included on the control. So if I want to look within a specific control program, I can do that here. And I can also change the data visualization. So here I'm looking at the status by each of the control programs in my environment. But we can take a number of different data metrics here as well. So if I want to see what period the controls are covering, how I'm doing over the course of the year, I can look at what users are actually performing the control. I've been a bit busy in this space. Most relevant, I think, for a lot of organizations is going to be this entity breakdown. So you see exactly how each of your entities are performing across your standardized control framework. This allows you to follow up a little better and kind of get an insight on any trend that might be occurring. Is this entity performing a little better than other ones, or what adjustments might need to be made within the overall framework to ensure a consistent performance across the entire group? Going a bit further down, we have a data table that is the more detailed breakdown of everything in this visualization. And we can layer this, again, based on all of the information, either the tags or or users, periods attached to the controls themselves. Here I'm looking at a breakdown based on my control program, what control is inside of the program, what entity is performing the control, and ultimately the users themselves that are performing the control. A common question we get is, how can I follow up on controls if they're not being performed on time? And that, again, can be done through the activity tab here that we can access through this data table. So if I look at my overdue column, I see this top row are my totals, and I have 4 total overdue controls. When I click on that here, I get a breakdown, a filtered activity list of all of the controls that are overdue for this particular time period. And from here, I have a lot of different options I can do as an administrator on the space. And this is the central sort of oversight and governance behind the control framework in Impero. If I want to see exactly what's going on within a control, I can click into it and see all of the responses, who's been performing what and when, and again, the full activity log, so I see what exactly has been done on the control. And from there, I have some different options if I want to help move things along or do some more administration on the actual control performance. So if I see these controls are overdue, I could select all of them as an admin. I can send reminders to whoever is currently stuck on the control in the workflow just to give them an additional notification. I can also reassign controls if a user is out sick or on holiday, what have you. I can also reopen closed controls. So if I notice some data was incorrectly entered on a completed control and maybe my reviewers missed it, I can reopen it and start the workflow over again to make sure that everything is corrected. And when you do this, this again is recorded on that activity log. So you have a full traceability of these actions as they occur. We can also archive controls. So if something's been sent out in error and you don't need it included in your reports, as an administrator, you can remove those as well. I think the bottom line with this is that all of these functions across the control activities allow you as an administrator on your Impero environment to have a really hands-on approach, while at the same time allowing your entities to perform the controls as they need to and according to your shared framework.
Amazing to see how much structure and responsibility can be brought out to everyone when you have it in a system. And I think that's exactly what Mikkel was also alluding to. And last but not least, the last case.
Thank you, Jasmine. So yeah, the last case that we brought today is a client and a case where they want to fast track to compliance with the Impero and PwC shared content solution. But let me here start with the case and the background. The client wanted to strengthen their internal control environment as a whole, but needed it to be done very fast and more practical. And just they needed to start now. They did not have the capabilities themselves to build all the risk activities, control activities, etc. And I wanted to avoid that long and resource-heavy implementation process. So the challenge was actually to really get a strong internal control environment in place quickly, effectively, and with the right level of quality. So quality, that's the important part here. This is where, and this is why exactly the Impero and PwC shared content solution was a perfect fit for this specific client. The shared content solution is a joint solution from PwC and Impero and should really be seen more as a combined package where PwC provides the content to live within the platform, meaning the process validation, the actual risks, the controls, and also the reporting engine. So what needs to be reported on, that is where we can help. And where Impero provide the platform, meaning the system support to document, execute, follow up, report on all these activities that's been designed, selected, identified. Together, this solution gives the client a fast, efficient, and high quality way to strengthen the internal control environment as a whole. So again, as a package solution. In this specific case, the first step was to identify the client's most critical financial processes together with the client. We then carried out a series of interviews and walkthroughs with the relevant process owners to understand the process in detail and also identify possible areas for improvements. Based on that work, we were able to identify these 5 to 8 critical risks that needed to be mitigated and that was most important in terms of exposure, and they were addressed appropriately. We then identified and selected, together with the client, the 5 to 10 controls, key controls that need to be in place to mitigate these specific risks. A key benefit of this solution was that the work was performed directly during these workshops in the Impero platform right away, meaning that it doesn't need to have a long design phase followed by a separate implementation phase. All the risk activities, all the control activities, the design, the implementation, everything happened during these interviews. So it was an efficient process from A to Z. The final step were therefore, so when we have identified the risk, had the workshop, designed the controls, everything that just needed at the end and what's needed, that was a practical user training. So how to use the platform, but most importantly, how to perform the control execution and risk assessment activities. So after the workshop, basically the client was ready to go live with their new internal control environment. So this was the fast track. Once the foundation is in place, they are basically able to continue strengthening the internal control environment themselves by adding further risk and further controls and just roll additional activities on board throughout the organization. So for this client, the solution was perfect fit because it combined both the PwC's content advisory support with the Impero platform in one integrated package, ensuring that they had the fast track that they needed. This made it possible to strengthen the internal control environment quickly, efficiently, while still maintaining the high quality. And again, what we designed, that was the starting point. As soon as the client understood the engine, there's basically no limits on where they can take it. So they could extend it to other finance areas or non-financial areas, add additional risk or additional controls, or do onboarding of new colleagues, new areas, new entities, etc. The key was to have a good foundation to get started, get a success, and then understand the engine so they could build on themselves. So again, we created the scalable foundation so the client could continue to develop over time whenever the time was right for them. And that was a good fast track story on how we could do this in practice.
Awesome. And yeah, that really speaks to the fact that there are a lot of people out there who lack those resources, like we saw in the first poll. And this was just a really quick way to get started, moving, and then also eventually buy-in. I'm going to jump into the Q&A now, but I did also just want to launch a poll that I'll leave up in the meantime, which is, we've of course had a quick look at the Impero platform, but if you'd like a more personalized deep dive into it, I know William and the rest of our team would be happy to share that. If you're interested in getting more information about the PwC shared content solution, I'll leave that open as well. Or if you'd like to see how that PwC setup works with Impero, I'll leave that open as well. But we do have some great Q&A, so I'm going to leave that open as well. And the first one that we have is, from your experience, what have you seen working well when organizations try to determine which controls truly add value versus those that mainly create operational complexity? Mikkel, do you have any insights on that?
Yeah, and I would say, as I said before, I would start focusing on the risks. So you should only focus on control when you ensure that it's actually mitigating a risk. And that specific risk that could be relevant for one part of the organization and could be a risk that are relevant for the whole organization. So always have the risk in mind to ensure that it creates the value needed, to ensure that it's just not a redundant exercise. Just this is a check mark exercise that yes, every control has been completed and we have green light all over. That's good. But if you don't have that value added, then it doesn't really make any sense performing that given activity.
Totally fair. We do need to make sure that it's actually reflecting the risks, right? And that's what we often see is people just start building out their control environments without actually taking into account the risks. William, I think the next question would be a great one for you, and it's how does the control performer in Impero, how do they handle if the control finding is that numbers or documentation is not correct?
Well, typically that'd be caught by any of the reviewers you put on your control. And the way it works in Impero is when a reviewer receives a control, they can see everything the first responsible user performed. So any files that were uploaded, responses to questions. If they notice something's not quite the way it should be, you can actually reject the control and send it back to the first user with comments so they know exactly what needs to be corrected. And as I mentioned a few times, all of that's recorded in the activity log. So you can see the entire workflow if a control was rejected, how many times it went through the workflow, and what corrections were made ultimately.
Amazing. Yeah, it's super important to have those, both the first and the second reviewer, because they really help pick that up. We also have a couple of other questions, which is what is the typical timeline of a project like this? And I'm sure Mikkel and William, you guys can both speak to this, but Mikkel, do you want to kick it off?
Sure. The bottom line is it comes down and back to the maturity of the organization. So are they ready to get started with this project at all? Do we have the buy-in? Do we have the right culture? Are we in the right setting to get started with this? If we have a strong foundation, then this process could be a quick process. If we don't have the internal alignment, if we don't have clear processes and clear understanding of the processes, this could take a bit longer time and a bit more difficult to do it yourself and get it as a success. There are many ways of handling this. It could be that you need, say, external support. So you want to go with the shared content way. So we don't have the resources or we don't have the time or the capabilities to do it themselves. Then we can ensure that all the right, say, risk and all the most critical risk are mitigated as a start. Also ensure that the right controls are in place, the most critical controls, and then based on that strong foundation, start building. Because this is not a one-time exercise. It can take time, but the short answer is if you are ready, you have a strong foundation, of course, it will take a shorter time than if you don't have the foundation. That is the basically the honest answer for this.
Absolutely. It's all about the maturity of the organization. William, what about you from an implementation perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I would emphasize a lot of the points Mikkel already made because we see that a lot with clients coming over to Impero. It really does depend on how much you have prepared in advance. But from a purely technical standpoint, the answer from our side is really a matter of days. So once you have that framework in place, you know your controls and who should be performing them. For us, this setup is an extremely quick process, and I think that's one of the advantages we have is that once you do have that background work done, you can be up and running very, very quickly in Impero.
Amazing. And that also combined with what Mikkel said, that when they run their workshops, for example, they're actually sitting and working directly in Impero, sometimes probably helps speeds it up even more. We have another great question, and I think it'd be for you, William. What integration options are available for cases where the organization already has established control processes in place, but wants to bring those validations into the Impero system to create a more coherent overview? For example, is it possible to automate the upload of documentation that is already produced as part of day-to-day operations?
It sounds like there's kind of two parts to that. So the first would be if you're bringing your entire control framework over to Impero, and that goes kind of back to the implementation timeline. And that again, it is pretty quick to get set up and have your framework translated into Impero controls going out. But that does mean that you have end users who are still performing controls within the system. When it comes to automation, we have some APIs, but that's mostly around getting data out of the system. So if you need to do some advanced modeling in Power BI or something like that, we have those capabilities. In terms of automated uploads to controls, so performing controls, that's kind of a new territory for us. There's been a lot of developments in the AI space, especially around having agents performing controls. It's not something we have as an official feature, but we've been talking to a lot of clients who've been doing some exploratory work around what that might look like. And of course, we're looking into it on our own. But at the moment, it's still a manual process of uploading the documents to the controls you're sending out through Impero.
Amazing. Thank you. And I think part of that as well, of course, is that especially in this where you are preparing for audits or making sure that all the materials are ready for audit, it's also super important that you're having those first and second reviewers on all of that documentation to make sure it is accurate. Two more questions, and we're also slowly wrapping up on time. Mikkel, what kind of companies should be prioritizing a stronger internal control environment, especially in 2026?
I would say they should be prioritized for companies that are growing, becoming more complex, or still relying on manual ways of working, to be honest. It's highly relevant for organization facing increasing stakeholder expectations, regulatory requirements, or just need for greater transparency and accountability. In terms of sizes, then in short, it doesn't only need to be relevant for very large corporations or companies. It's relevant for basically any corporations and organizations that want to be more scalable, reliable, and professional, and just have a strong foundation and a strong control environment. So there are many different aspects to consider, but in all, it is companies that are growing. They are maybe growing a lot and don't have, let's say, the overview with them. So the foundation needs to be right. So in short, it's not only for very large corporations, it's for everyone in terms of complexity.
Thanks for debunking that myth, because I do think a lot of organizations do imagine it's something that they only need to start tackling when they're a little bit of a bigger organization. The last question that we have here, I think, is for you, William, and it is just, you mentioned AI. What AI features does the Impero platform have, if any?
Yeah, I mean, AI is a very big, it's kind of on the front of everyone's mind in this space. There's a very big push to have AI adoption in platforms, but I think we want to be smart about it. So we don't want to just add AI features for the sake of having AI features. We've tried to think of ways that will actually complement the process and help reduce the workflow while still keeping the human decision making involved in the entire process. So from that note, we actually did have a release just last week where we released 3 new AI features around control design, so automated suggestions for control descriptions and control tasks, as well as some risk insights analysis, so getting a sort of a consolidated picture of what's going on in your risk map based on an AI-generated summary. And these are just kind of the start for us. I think a lot of companies are still exploring and figuring out where AI would best fit into the platform. And we're certainly still in that boat, but I think we're taking some really good steps towards that initial adoption and finding the ways that AI could best complement both the platform and the ways that our users are working in the platform.
Amazing. Thank you. And I'll just mention those AI features are in beta and available to all of our existing customers. So if you happen to be on the line and you haven't checked them out yet, it does require an opt-in, but highly recommend that you check them out. For those of you who answer the poll, I just want to say a big thank you. We'll follow up with you if you requested a follow-up. And with that, I want to say a big thank you for listening in today. And if you're interested in keeping the conversation going, we'll, of course, send out a follow-up email. Encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn as we'll continue to invite to sessions like this. I know you can also connect with Mikkel. They also have a lot of great information sharing at PwC Denmark. And of course, I want to invite you guys all to our upcoming flagship event, Compliance Curated, which we'll be hosting here in Copenhagen this fall, and you can already pre-register. But with that, we just want to say on behalf of Impero and PwC Denmark, a very, very big thank you for joining today's webinar. We hope you got some inspiration on how you can simplify your key controls, both from a theoretical viewpoint, some practical use cases, but also having a look at what a potential structure can look like in a platform like ours. Thank you, Mikkel. Thank you, William, and wishing you all a wonderful day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.